Okay, so welcome back everyone to another supplement lecture in RN50. And in today's lecture, we'll actually be continuing with React, talking about state and how to update it. Now, notice that this was particularly a concept that you students weren't able to really understand in the live lecture, which is completely understandable as it's a hard topic and it's what programmers moving to React struggle with the most. So we'll be going into detail, and it will be great if you understand it. If you don't, whatever questions you have, you can write in the comment section or in the live chat when this goes premiere. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Okay, so in today's lecture, we're going to actually be using a counter app to, test for state or explain state. So we're going to be making this web application that basically has a counter, and when you click a button, it will decrement it, and if you click a button, it'll increment it. So say we were writing this in something like JavaScript, which is an imperative language, okay? So I'm not going to write the HTML, but I'll write the JavaScript that will correspond to it. So I would say we'll say x is equal to 0, because that's the value we have to update. And then we'll have a function it'll be called increment, and that'll do just x plus equals 1, and then we go update the document. So we have to do document query selector, and we'll say something like probably there's like this ID that says count. Now this HTML is not written, so I'm just writing what JavaScript would look like. Then we would say dot inner HTML equals to x, right? So that just updates it. So basically what we're doing is in this function, we're updating the value of x, and we're saying, okay, here you go, document, this is the new value of x. We're telling it where to update the DOM. So we can have a decrement function where x is minus 1. We subtract x by 1, and again document.query selector, we put that ID equals x. So we're changing the inner HTML. So there we go. So essentially what we're doing in this code is we're saying, okay, update the value in each function, and then go and update the DOM. So essentially re-render the DOM. Now this can be very inefficient, right? Say you have 1,000 variables and you have 1,000 functions doing work at the same time. You continuously have to keep re-rendering, and it becomes lengthy code, and it just reinforces the whole point of imperative programming. And it also takes a hit on performance because you're continuously re-rendering. So React, because it's declarative, uses something called state. So state is actually, again, an object that you declare in your class, and you can have any values inside it. And basically what you do in React is you say, okay, I'm not going to continuously update the DOM. In my render function, I'm going to specify one part which will just reference the value from the state. And whenever I want to update it, I will just update the state, and that will take reference from the state. So essentially what you're doing is, you would think this would be the right way, saying that you're basically having a variable, and you're including the value of that variable in some element, and when you're updating the variable, you expect React to update that element's value as well. So let's see how this works, okay? So let's move to this counter.html file that I've created in VS Code. Now I've already put in the head, and whoops, I forgot to change the title to counter. So we have our head with the scripts and the title, and let's say body. And in here, let's have a div with an ID of app. Okay, just we've done like we've done before. Oops, don't want that. Actually, there we go. So we have this div, it's an empty div. Now let's put our script tag as usual. And the type, text/babel. Just like normal. Now let's write our class. So we'll call this the counter class. Now we're going to use nesting again. So counter it extends React.component. Whoops. There we go. Thought there was a bug there. And so now we have to define what's called a constructor. So constructor is basically, you can think of it as this function that basically initializes the class. So it says, okay, these are the values that the class has to come with by default. So we write a constructor function with an argument of props. Okay, don't worry about the argument too much. Just know that you have to put it there. And then you have to put this line that says super props, which basically you can think of it as basically extending the props that the React.component class has. Now comes the main part. So we say this.state Now, why do we say this.state? Well, this meaning this class component, and we're saying, okay, this has a state, and in this we'll just have one value, which will be count, and that'll be set to 1. Now let's render. So you can see the state is an object. So we had this value called count, and it is necessary to actually define count or any value. You have to give it a value before starting out. So in render, we're just going to write a return. We'll have a div. And then we'll have an h1. Oops. And here we'll just say this dot state dot count. Now you can see again we're plugging in that JavaScript. So you can see we're using the curly braces to plug in some JavaScript syntax, and you can see we're referencing this.state.count, right? And now let's put a button. Now buttons have this on-click prop, and let's just say this dot. Oops, it won't be in quotes. So it'll be in braces. So we're saying this dot increment. and we're just saying a plus sign. Let's have another button here. Oops. And here we'll just say decrement. So we'll have another button, this dot decrement, and we'll just put a minus sign. Let's just close the div. And there we go. Alright, so we have our class. So let's render this onto the screen just to see how it looks like. So I'll just say, actually, we'll make another app class below here. So this will extend React.component, and this will just return it's going to return a div, and we'll return the counter component. So let's close the div. Now you've seen this code before, right? This is from previous lectures. Oops, something broke. Oh, so I'm just going to restart my screen reader because it's broke. So just gonna wait. But essentially you've seen this code before, and the only new thing will be the state and the buttons that we've put in the counter class, right? And so the buttons, as you can see, they basically, the on-click property says what happens when the button gets clicked. We'll just render this on the screen, see how it looks. So it's just gonna wait for my screen reader to start up. Oops, something broke. Okay, we're gonna start that up. So this doesn't really happen. We have a technical issue. So just, okay, there we go. So we should have that startup. There we go. Okay, now let's render this. So React on that render. So, and we want to render this in so using, excuse me, so we're rendering it in the app div, so the div with the ID app. So let's actually run this. So see how this looks. Hopefully I didn't screw up, but we're just booting up here. Oops. So it's taking a second here. So if we run this, hopefully this will open up in a browser. Okay, so this is opening, and there we go. So it's opening up in Chrome. It's taking a lot of time. Oh, whoops. It's another crash. Okay, there we go. And there we go. So we have this heading that says 1, and we have a buttons with plus and minus, right? But when we click them, the value of the heading stays the same, right? So what do we want? We want this value to increment by 1 if we press the plus button, and increment by -1 if we press the minus button. So that's not happening, right? So let's actually look at how to update the state and how to handle events. Okay, so let's look at how to update the state. So we've defined this state in the class, right? In the counter class. So let's go right up there. And so we need two functions, right? One that says that's the increment function, and one is the decrement function. So let's write the increment one first. And we're using this arrow syntax. So basically we have the equal to sign, and we have parentheses that says no arguments, and you can see the equal and greater, that's like an arrow that basically says what should this function return. And well, we want to change this state to be something else. So say we wanted to change it to like 1. We could just do this.state.count plus 1. Unfortunately, React doesn't allow you to do that because it has certain security reasons. One of them being that if there are many functions changing the state at the same time, one might accidentally access the value of another key in the state. So we actually have this function called setState, which basically takes in an object where you have a key, and the value of that key is what you want to change the state. So if you want to change the count state, we would just say this dot set state, and in here we would say count, and we would say it to 1. So let's actually run this and see how this works. Oops, I think I broke something. Let's oh, okay. Say we wanted to keep it as 2, okay? And we have to put it in here. There we go. Oh, something's still breaking. Things look fine. So one way to check if there's something broken is quick debugging technique. So we go to inspect, right, and that'll load. So we go to the console, we go to inspect in our browser and we go to the console. So we have one error and one warning. Oops. Okay. Okay, so we have our error at the bottom of the file, which is weird. There we go. That should fix it. Let's run that file. Yeah, there we go. So we have our counter. We have 1, so if I hit enter. So if we press the plus button, it became the 2. But now it stays at 2, right? So how do we update the state to be the current count plus 1? So if you want, you can just pause the lecture, try to write this code on your own, and resume it when you think you've got the answer. So hopefully you've paused it and gone through what to do. So essentially, instead of updating it to something like 2, we could just say count in the this.set state. We could say this.state.count plus 1. So it'll take the current value of count and it'll update it by 1. So if we save that and reload it, and if you keep pressing the plus button, it keeps incrementing. So it's on 11, and there we go. So it's continuously working. Now, say we wanted to write our decrement function. Now, since you know how to set the state, you can try to write this decrement function on your own. So pause the video and write it. If you don't get it, I'm just gonna show you right now. So the decrement function's quite easy actually. It's just, so we're our decrement, and that'll be equal to this dot set state, and in here we'll just say count, and that's gonna be the value of count. So the value of count will be this. Oops. This dot state dot count minus 1. So there we go. So we have both our functions, and let's actually test this. So let's keep pressing the increment button, and we go to 16 if we press the minus button. And wow, so something's breaking in our decrement function. So something's breaking. Now let's see what is breaking again. So our increment button is working, but our decrement button isn't. So now this inspect tab is going to be very useful for you. And also I'm just writing this live, so bear with me for a second because I may get a lot of errors. So we have one warning. Okay, what if we close this? And let's run counter.html. Okay? So it's going to take some time. Okay. Whoops. Something's happening. Okay, oh, I just had to reload the page. Whoops. So it works. So you can see, one second. Just gonna restart my screen reader here because it crashed. And just mentioning that this is not one of those smooth supplement lectures, but I'm not gonna edit this part out. So it's just loading. And there we go. So it does decrement. So we're to -8 and we can increment it and we're back to 7. So essentially that's how you set state. So to summarize, state is this object that lets you like track data in your application, and it basically is much more convenient because you can just reference a value from that state when you're rendering, and whenever you want to update it, you just update the state and the DOM will update accordingly. So it doesn't actually even have to re-render every time you update the state. And to set the state, you actually use this set state function and you pass in an object where you basically update whatever keys you want to update in the state. So in next lecture, we're actually going to look at an example of everything put together, and we're going to look at an addition app. So just see you next time then.